Story 1. The nightly adventures out-of-body experience. A few years ago, my mother told me I was a strange child because she never had to tell me to go to bed when I was growing up. I always told her when I was done with my day and went to sleep. I laughed and asked, "Do you know why?" She shook her head, so I told her. The truth is, my nighttime activities were far more exciting and fascinating than being in my body during the day. When my head hit the pillow, I felt like I took flight. I stood at the edge of the bed, launched myself out the window, and my adventures began. I soared over rooftops, sometimes peeking into windows, and could cover great distances in the blink of an eye. Often I would land and blend into crowds of people who usually spoke foreign languages I didn't understand. Often I was alone. Sometimes a cat or a pigeon would perch on my shoulder, and on some trips, both at once. Sometimes I heard the most beautiful, ethereal music. During these journeys, I could see people, but they couldn't see me. I constantly tested that. I would board a bus and ride around the city, or stroll through an interesting building. Mostly I loved floating through the air and gazing down at our beautiful Earth. All my senses seemed heightened in that state, and the music and colors were breathtaking. Incredibly, what frustrated me most was that I could never become aware of the process of returning to my body. One night, I resolved to make every effort to understand how it happened. I was always aware when a journey was nearing its end because I would begin to feel my energy draining, a sudden weakness or a pull drawing me back to my body. That night, I found myself losing momentum while flying over a sparse forest, and suddenly I came upon a large construction site. A massive brick building with walls about 6 meters high. Though it had a roof, I slowly settled into the unfinished interior space. And my final thought was, oh no, now what do I do? I never succeeded in figuring out how I returned to my body and simply continued enjoying my nightly adventures. Many years later, one evening, a spiritual study group meeting had to be canceled due to a snowstorm. Only 4 of us were at Lou's out of the usual 20 attendees, one of whom was a hypnotist, so we began an experiment. My parents were spending the winter in Florida, so the target of our experiment was for me. I intended to make an astral visit to see what was happening there, record my impressions in this world, then call them to confirm where they were and what they were doing at that exact moment. I left my body, flew east from Ohio to avoid the bad weather, and traveled down the east coast of Florida. When I arrived at my parents' home, I saw an aunt and uncle who were visiting. My uncle had a cane leaning against the side of his chair. He didn't normally use a cane. They had just finished dinner. My father. I was watching TV while my mother washed dishes in the kitchen. I tried my hardest to get my mother's attention. I even yanked the dish towel while she was holding it in her hand, but she remained completely unaware. In a subsequent phone call, my mother confirmed every single detail of what I had seen during that visit. I revealed nothing except asking where they were and what they had been doing that evening. It turned out that Uncle Vic had sprained his ankle, which explained why he was temporarily using a cane. It seems this 3-dimensional experience holds far more mysteries than we might imagine. Story 2. The Dark Void, near-death-like experience. When I was a child, around age 11, on a summer afternoon, we had been shopping a short distance from home. This was a quick event that happened before we made it back. I was lying in the back seat of my mother's car while she and my sister talked in the front. I started to truly drift off and said to myself, I wonder what it feels like to die. I may have closed my eyes for a moment, I'm not sure. Suddenly, I found myself in a pitch-black, empty space. I was instantly transported there. I remembered the sunny day. I had been thinking about death, and the very moment I was thinking about it, I stepped into an infinite expanse, a pitch-black space that seemed endless. And no matter where you were in it, it made no difference, because it was all the same. I wasn't moving through it. I was simply a consciousness within the void. I was astounded by the difference between life and death. It was everything. I had left, and I was deeply disturbed to be there because everything seemed so finite, finished, with no second chance. I didn't want to be here. I thought this meant that when I died, I might return to this place if I wasn't ready, and I tried to find meaning for my life. For me, the immediate answer that came was help others. My thoughts appeared very clearly in that undefined void. The only sound was my own thinking, which made the space profoundly lonely. There were no distractions. You could hear yourself very clearly. My state of awareness and consciousness was the same before, during, and after that event. I did not want to leave. Returning to the infinite void, the emotions I experienced were frustration, the feeling of a sudden and unexpected ending, and the wondering if I were released from this place, how could I feel good about my life, knowing I might have to come back here again? Then a fear bordering on desperation, ending in an intense yearning to return to ordinary life. I reached a point where I desperately wanted to escape that darkness. I found myself back in the car, looking around, feeling overwhelming relief. At the time, I regarded it as a real event, because I had remained conscious throughout that brief car ride. The question for me is this: I stepped into that dark void and maintained my own continuous stream of thought before, during, and after. I remember instantly snapping out of that space and being aware that I was in the back seat with an unbroken stream of consciousness. I was alert throughout. It probably took less than a minute in total. Go there quickly. Contemplate the place and what you would do with your life if given the chance. Stay long enough to feel trapped, then become frightened enough to pull yourself out. Needless to say, I am now an environmentalist. Story 3. Surgery and the light. At age 14, I became very ill, and my parents took me to the emergency room. They needed to operate immediately. I opened my eyes in the middle of the surgery and saw a bright light. I heard nurses and doctors talking. The anesthesia wasn't working. They needed more. I watched the doctors continue doing something to my body. I heard one doctor say, "Nurse, give me more oxygen." I turned my head to look at the nurse, and what I saw was frightening. I watched the nurse retrieve the oxygen mask, but she didn't put it on my face. She didn't even look at me. She placed the mask behind my back. When I opened my eyes again, I was floating in a corner of the hospital hallway. It felt strange to be floating, but I could see my parents talking with a doctor. Then my mother screamed, but I couldn't hear it. The doctor just shook his head with a negative expression, and I thought I had died, that I was a soul. I wanted to go to my mother and tell her I loved her, but I couldn't move. Then I felt something like a giant vacuum cleaner pulling me at tremendous speed. I could feel the air. Then I saw a light, small at first, but I was moving impossibly fast. Then I plunged quickly into the light, feeling nothing at all, only an infinite peace. When I opened my eyes, however, my mother was beside me, and I realized I had returned to the real world. Story 4. Recent strange sleep experiences. A great many strange things have happened in my life, and I've searched for answers in increasingly mysterious places, as I've done many times before. Over the past few weeks, I've had difficulty sleeping, which isn't entirely unusual. Since my teenage years, I've read extensively about out-of-body experiences, abductions, and UFOs. I'm not overly frightened, and when these strange phenomena occur, I almost immediately recognize what's happening. Perhaps for the 10th time in recent weeks, I heard that peculiar light swirling sound reminiscent of crickets, and I immediately knew I was attempting an out-of-body experience. I opened my eyes and saw a floating light, jelly-like in appearance, shifting through many colors: vivid red, pink, green, blue, and neon yellow. It buzzed cheerfully above me. It flooded me with joy. It made me feel safe. So I simply watched it for a while and smiled. Now I recalled having read that if you see a certain kind of light, staring into it will help pull you from your body into an OBE. I was gazing at it when, at the corner of my eye, I began to see a shadow slowly creeping upward. I shifted my attention to that figure. and it was a man. The light remained in my peripheral vision. The man smiled at me, but he had no face, only a shadow. Yet somehow that made me feel even more safe, and I had an intuition that he might be one of my spirit guides. The guide extended a hand, and I slowly reached out and took it, still smiling. The next thing I remember is that while still hearing that strange swirling sound, I was being brought back to my body. The sound faded, and my eyes opened. Story 5. Lucid dreaming gone wrong. This happened recently and genuinely terrified me. I've always been able to experience lucid dreams but struggled to maintain lucidity or complete tasks while in that state. So I decided to try using lamine and chine because it was said to enhance lucidity. I fell asleep and set an alarm. I woke after 5 hours, took the supplement and went back to sleep. From there, things became strange. I began drifting into sleep but remained very conscious of my surroundings. I saw shadowy figures everywhere, but they seemed not to notice me. They were conversing with one another, but I couldn't make out any specific conversation. It sounded like a room full of people all talking at once. Looking around, I noticed the door to my room. I always sleep with the door closed, and I noticed it was now open, which startled me because of the angle it was ajar. I couldn't see clearly into the hallway, but amid the noise of conversations, I heard a voice calling me in my father's voice. As the voice drew closer, I realized it was not my father. Then I saw the hand of something, a hand deformed and malformed, looking truly horrific. I jolted awake and sat up in bed. It was very difficult to know whether I was truly awake because in the previous dream I had maintained complete clarity. I went downstairs and realized I was genuinely awake. I was terrified and too anxious to fall back asleep because the experience had been so profoundly strange. I waited about 30 minutes and decided it had only been a dream, so I wanted to try again. I knew the supplement would still be active, so I went back to my room and lay down. Before I even realized what was happening, I was flying over my city. It was still dark, early morning. As I flew, everything began to go very blurry for some reason. So I shouted loudly and clearly, "Clarity now." Everything snapped back into focus, and I saw a beautiful blonde woman, late 30s perhaps, sitting and gazing out a window. I flew to her and entered through her window. She had a curious expression on her face, as though she knew I was there, but I wasn't certain. She got up, made herself a cup of tea, and sat down to drink it at a glass table. Then I decided I should leave because she seemed uncomfortable with my presence. I sank through the floor down to the level below and walked out through the closed door. I thought of my friend Jordan, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. I decided to visit him and was transported to his apartment. He was there with a few girls, talking with them about plans for the day. They left, and I was alone in the room. At this point, for some reason, I felt profoundly exhausted. I decided to lie down and rest, and as I did so, I felt myself roll out of the body within the dream I was inhabiting. As I rolled out, I turned back and saw my previous body. I could clearly see the details of my own face. As I drew a breath, I began to panic slightly because I had never experienced seeing my own body like that before. As I began to worry, everything started to shake, and I felt myself being pulled back into that body. I calmed myself and decided to just let things unfold naturally. After calming down, everything became clearer, and I noticed a significant difference in how I felt. I was filled with energy and felt extraordinarily light. I abandoned the body from the old dream, and in this new body, I flew down from the balcony to the street. Standing on the road, I remembered one of the things I had wanted to try during a lucid dream: time travel. I said in a clear voice, "I want to travel back in time." It wasn't a long tunnel with light at the end. It was more like a black hole blended with a subway tunnel. I was moving very fast through this tunnel, and as I traveled, I looked at my hand. Written on it was text I didn't recognize. The letters were yellow and glowing brilliantly. So absorbed was I in looking at my hand that I didn't notice I had stopped. I was on the same street as before, but everything was different. The road was dirt, and people in clothing from the 1800s were walking everywhere. The buildings were wooden and 2 stories tall. I walked the street and no one noticed me. Not a single person knew I was there. Everything was too bright and dusty. I was about to explore this new world when I spotted the familiar blonde woman from before, now sitting at one of the windows, and this time she was looking directly at me. I found this deeply strange because no one else could see me. She beckoned me closer, so I flew up and passed through the wall. I was quite surprised when she began to speak. She asked, "You're new here, aren't you?" I answered. "I don't know. I suppose so." I was rather confused by the question. She told me I needed to get out of this situation. Regarding the writing on my hand, she wanted me to hold it out and repeat after her. I began to extend my hand, and she started speaking in a language that sounded deeply disturbing, more like a curse than anything else, and something felt very wrong. I didn't repeat her words, and she opened one eye to look at me. Realizing I wasn't going to comply, she opened the other eye and smiled a knowing smile. Even so, it seemed very sinister. A glowing, shadowy figure appeared and then vanished right before me. She became excited and said, "Come on, we have to follow it." Both of us passed through the wall and hovered over the street. She floated before me, and I remembered the authority I have in Christ and whispered under my breath, "Show me your true form." There was no way she could have heard me, but she stopped dead as if she knew exactly what I had just done. Then she turned and revealed herself as a monstrous, disfigured, demonic woman, and she was furious. She lunged at me and tried to attack. I ducked and grabbed her by the legs, lifting her up. I hoisted her into the air and slammed her forcefully to the ground before she could get back up. I returned to the body in Jordan's apartment, then returned to my body in my own room. At one point, I could see my own room through one eye and Jordan's apartment through the other, almost like a split screen in a video game. I shook my head hard and sat bolt upright in bed. I wasn't sure whether I was truly awake because I had maintained absolute lucidity throughout the dream state. After several minutes, I confirmed that I was awake. I swore I would never play around with lucid dreaming again. Story 6. The Ghost in the Back Seat. Ghost number 1 in the back seat. It was 1995 in the north of England. My daughter Abby, who was 17 at the time, had just passed her driving test, so we bought her a second-hand car. One morning, at around 4:15 a.m., I was getting ready to leave for work. The driveway was only wide enough for one car, and my daughter, as was typical at her age, had come home late the previous night and parked behind my car. This meant I had to start her engine, reverse her car out first, then reverse my own car out, and then maneuver her car back into the driveway. That morning, I had reversed her car out, leaving the engine running. The driver's side door was open, meaning the interior light was on. I should also mention it was still dark outside. I turned back to reverse my own car, but in doing so, I happened to glance over at Abby's car. I couldn't believe my eyes. Sitting in the rear left seat was a young girl. It was a 2-door car, and she appeared to be attending to her makeup. The image was in full color, not gray or transparent. I thought, what on earth is going on? Or words to that effect, and immediately ran toward the car but found no one there. I've often wondered since where that spirit came from. It was still there. My rational mind had simply obscured my perception. I only told Abby about it many years later, not wanting to frighten her. Remarkably, she said she had often sensed a gentle presence behind her while driving that car. Story 7. The Black Cloud Spirit. We moved into a house that had once been part of a military base in Utah. I'd heard that in the 1970s there had been a 2-lane traffic accident up the street from that neighborhood, and that a serial killer had also been operating in the area, one the police had never managed to catch. Bear in mind, those are verifiable facts. What follows, you'll have to take my word for. About a year into living there, small things began happening daily. Strange noises, lights turning on and off. I was fine with that. But then I started drinking heavily and feeling depressed all day for no apparent reason. And then things got worse. One night I was drinking with a friend and I invited the spirits to come and play with us. Big mistake. I'm not sure what happened, but my friend told me my eyes turned black and I started speaking in another language. She was terrified, and immediately. A few nights later, I came home and a black cloud hung over the room. I woke my husband and told him I was very frightened. He sat straight up, looked directly into my eyes, and said in a voice much deeper than his own, "I am not your husband." I was absolutely terrified. He later said he could feel it happening as though he had no control over his body. On another occasion, I was carrying on a conversation with some kind of demonic entity inside my head, while I was unable to move my body and could barely think. That conversation was essentially trying to persuade me to deny the truth. I invoked God, refusing the demonic temptation and asking for his help, and the spirit fled as though it were afraid. Many similar events kept occurring until my children had to stay with their grandparents, and I was too frightened to shower or do anything alone. Some people from the church came to bless the house, and I was advised to give up alcohol, which I did. But that same night, a demonic voice sounded outside the bedroom window, telling me to let it in. I screamed, "No," and from that point on, we moved away. But I know it was a genuine evil force. That place, and I wish only the best for whoever lives there now. Story 8. Spirits through the Ouija board. This happened around August 13th or 15th. I was 14 at the time, in Vero Beach, Florida. I am completely open to the spiritual world and the occult. This seems to be a family tradition. I come from a lineage some would call witches. I used to love playing with the Ouija board, thinking it was wonderful to be able to talk to spirits. That day I was at my aunt's house along with my mother and 2 other aunts, both of whom lived there, and we decided to play with the Ouija board. We connected with the first spirit. A spirit appeared almost immediately but was unsuccessful. That spirit spoke in Creole, a language none of us using the board understood. Another spirit connected with us almost immediately after we said goodbye to the first. This spirit was a little girl. We spoke with her for at least an hour. Her name was Ava, and throughout that hour-long conversation, we asked her only ordinary questions. How old are you? Why are you in this house? And so forth. And then things began to get strange. My aunt had 2 cats and 3 dogs. The 2 cats ran from one of my aunt's rooms to the back door. In the kitchen, their backs to me. I wondered why the cats had run so suddenly and randomly and were now sitting there staring at the top of the door. So I asked Ava, the spirit, whether we were alone. She said no. She told us there was someone near the door. I understood it was the spirit we had said goodbye to earlier, the one who couldn't speak English, so Ava couldn't tell him to leave. I then asked her if she was standing with the man near the door, and she said no. I asked where she was standing, or where she was sitting, and she said beside a dog. As I mentioned, my aunt had 3 dogs, 1 light brown, 1 dark brown, and 1 pale tan. I asked which one, and she said the dark brown one. The dark brown dog was sitting on the sofa behind my mother. I asked Ava whether it was behind the blonde woman, because at the time my mother had blonde hair, and she said yes. I asked her to prove it, and she touched my mother's shoulder and pushed the jacket off the lamp beside her. My mother instantly broke out in goosebumps, her hair standing on end. On the final day, we soon discovered that all Ava had wanted was to cross over, because her grandfather had abandoned her when he crossed. Story 9. a family history of paranormal events. There are a great many supernatural and paranormal experiences in my family. I'll start with my father's stories, from oldest to most recent. When my father was young, around 7 years old, a young man about 20 was camping in Missouri with his family, mother, father, and older sister when a man who looked like a cowboy walked up to their campsite and asked if he could warm himself by the fire. He spent about 3 hours talking and telling stories with everyone. He also had a white Labrador dog with him. Suddenly he said he had to leave and began walking away. My father was about to ask if he could stay the night when the cowboy disappeared into the forest with his dog. Later, when the camping trip ended, they asked around about the man and his dog, and it turned out both had been dead, having perished in a flood on the nearby river years earlier. Another story comes from the early 1990s, when my father was skateboarding with 2 friends, Tim and Ryan. They looked up at the sky and saw a massive cloud, but strangely, it was shaped exactly like a Chinese dragon. Its eyes even reflected light, as though it were a real Chinese dragon hanging in the sky above Iowa. My father said he could see his own reflection in the eyes of that cloud-white dragon, a long serpentine body with ram's horns and talons sharp as a hawk's, teeth pointed like a cat's, and even scales like a fish. But the most striking feature was the strangely human reflective eyes. The next story about him doesn't take place at any specific time, but spans most of his life. As a child, his bedroom was in the attic, and he says the attic was haunted by the spirit of a loved one every night. The spirit would tuck him in while he was sleeping and gently place his head on the pillow. Here are some of my own experiences. We once had a dog named Megan, a black Labrador. Very sweet. When I was 11, around 8 o'clock, a table flew off the floor and launched itself at her. A large wooden coffee table suddenly hurled itself toward her. She was all right, but whatever caused it did not like dogs. Another time, around 211, I was hiking with my father and younger sister at a park called Riverside in Iowa. I was standing there while my father spoke with my sister when I spotted a large, dark shape emerging from the bushes. It had the large, shadowy body of a lion with a thick face, but strangely resembled an anteater, black eyes and hooves. About a year later in that same forest, I found hoofed footprints in the dirt, but they appeared to have been left by something walking on 2 hind legs. One of the strangest events happened to me around 2013. My father was having a terrible day. He owed rent he couldn't pay. The bank had taken him to court, and from there everything only got worse. In a fit of rage, he punched a large hole through the wall. His hand bled, and he smeared the blood on the wall. He had no idea that in doing so he had summoned a demon. The blood on the wall, combined with a rage that far exceeded the ordinary, conjured a strange wolf demon into his sleep. The creature attacked him. It had deep red eyes and fur black, as it had the body of a wolf, but with strange human hands, pale white skin. It spoke to my father and told him it was older than humanity itself. When my father woke, he thought it might have been a dream until he saw the letter J, massive bruises in the shape of a handprint around his neck. Story 10. The Ghostly Bell Ringer in Korea. There are people who are very sensitive to the spiritual world. Whether you believe in it or not is really only a matter of debate, because ultimately, whether or not you believe in ghosts, demons, angels, or other supernatural entities, the truth doesn't change, they exist. Some people are simply more aware of their presence than others, and those are precisely the people they most enjoy tormenting. It was the summer of 1966, and I was 12 years old, visiting family in Korea. I come from a family some might describe as aristocratic, so we lived in quite a large house in the center of town. The layout of our house was simple and practical. There was a large metal gate surrounding the property, and passing through it, you could walk along a path leading to the main house. Korea at the time was still a developing country, especially just over a decade after the end of the Korean War. So many homes had toilets located outside the main house. Yes, the kind that I'm sure most of you would compare to portable toilets today. The rain was coming down in torrents. A Korean summer is essentially monsoon season. It had been raining heavily and continuously. It was past midnight, and I needed to use the toilet. The outhouse was a short distance from the main house, and the quickest access was through a side door at the edge of the living room, a sliding door. I took the umbrella from the small box beside the door, put on my outdoor shoes, and opened my umbrella. Just as I heard the doorbell ring from the front gate, I turned my head back to check the time on the clock. No, I wasn't imagining it. It was past 2 a.m. Who would be ringing a bell at this hour? I stepped down from the back porch onto the stone-paved path, rain pouring down and hammering against my umbrella. "Hello?" I called, but no one answered. My grandmother was quite superstitious and had always told me that when a stranger comes knocking, especially in the middle of the night, you must call out 3 times before going to open the door. I had not called 3 times before answering. You'll be taken by a demon, or what is commonly known as a goblin. The bell rang again and I took another step forward. "Who's there?" No answer came. The rain began to ease, but the bell did not ring a 3rd time. I felt no relief. Instead, my hand tightened around the umbrella handle and I cautiously took one more step forward. Someone. Is anyone out there? A sense of unease rose in my chest. I assumed it was late-night rain and I needed the toilet. After a few seconds of silence, I turned to head back toward the house, and then something caught the corner of my eye. I slowly craned my neck to look back at the gate and saw a pallid hand reaching out from the edge of the gate in the rain. Normally, most people would assume it was just another Asian person trying to break into my house, but no one is whiter than a sheet of paper unless they're wearing makeup, and waterproof foundation doesn't quite work that way. That arm belonged to a tall, thin woman who was slowly crawling over the edge of the gate, trying to undo the lock. I didn't even realize I had dropped my umbrella and was now drenched through with rain. My voice caught for a moment before quickly returning, and I let out a scream of pure terror before spinning around and trying to get back inside. I slipped on the wet gravel, my shoes flying off as I fell to the ground. I screamed, struggling to get up off the ground and lunging toward the house, only to slam my foot hard against the edge of the porch step. I only learned afterward that I had hit my foot so hard the skin had split and bone was exposed, yet no blood came out. By the time my family came out to see what was happening, I was drenched and trembling on the floor. My aunt came to check on me, seeing the sheer horror on my face. I didn't even know what was happening to me, and it took about 4 glasses of water before I began to recover. I drank hot tea and took a Chinese herbal remedy before I was finally able to calm down. Once composed again, I told my uncle what had happened. He said there was no one there. I blinked at him in disbelief that couldn't possibly be true. I couldn't have hallucinated. I knew what I had seen. "There's someone trying to break into this house, Uncle. Don't you remember?" But in the middle of his response, he pointed at the door. So he had gone to see who was there. But when he opened the gate, no one. That's impossible. I'm not insane. Uncle, I swear I'm not saying it was a ghost. But you were lucky. If it had been, you'd have been in very serious trouble. I agree. I'm glad I didn't open the gate. Story 11. The Girl by the Pond. Most of my family lived in rural areas. My father was an active duty officer in the Korean Army, so I was often sent to stay with relatives during holidays. I had chosen not to attend high school. Middle school had been enough. I couldn't afford the tuition, and my father didn't want to be bothered, so I usually worked in the city and came home. For the summer holidays, I returned to the countryside. Life was peaceful, though many young people my age often found the simplest things extraordinary. Take movies, for example. In the early 1970s, there was no real cinema in Gyeongju. So whenever a film was shown, it was screened outdoors, where most people would set up blankets and watch on a large canvas sheet. Many of the films they had were also shown long after their original release dates. I was 17 at the time, visiting family for Chuseok, the Korean Harvest Festival. We had arrived a few days earlier than expected, so some of my friends were still in school. Several of my friends pleaded and pestered me to go with them to see a film that evening. The film was called Red Scarf, about a Korean female fighter pilot in World War II. I had seen it when it was first released in Taiwan and told them so, but they didn't listen. Whether I watched it or not wasn't the point. It had been months since they'd seen me, and they wanted to spend time with me. Since my family lived in the countryside, I didn't think much about the buses. There weren't many running in and out of town. The last bus had already come and gone, so our group walked as usual. We still had plenty of daylight before the screening, and we chatted with each other, catching up on the latest gossip, and they asked me about city life. On the way into town, there was a dirt road you had to walk along, beside a man-made pond, and in the evenings that road led out to an open clearing. Some farmers had planted rice in the pond during the war years to stockpile food, but that was long past, no longer necessary. I always wondered why no one ever bothered filling in that pond. Since there were no fish in it and no one planted rice there anymore, it seemed like a wasted stretch of land. Whenever I asked the older people in the village about it, they simply said they were not permitted to touch it. Satisfied with that, I let the matter go. We arrived in town where we set up our blankets, had a few light snacks, and sat down to watch the film. Naturally, the others reacted with the astonishment I had anticipated. After chatting a while longer, we gathered our things and began making our way back down the dirt road toward the countryside where our homes were. Since most of the people I spent time with were boys, it was no surprise they behaved like typical country boys, looking for mischief, as boys do. On the way home, that rowdy group decided they wanted to start a fight. I argued with my friends but wanted no part of it, so when they left me behind, I didn't think much of it. The one thing that annoyed me was that they had taken the only flashlight before leaving me alone. I turned back onto the main dirt road, heading toward the countryside. Back then, there were no streetlights, so I had only my own eyes to rely on, and hoped they would adjust as well as possible under the sliver of moon hanging in the sky. The air was still filled with the sound of cicadas and the rustle of dry leaves. I trudged along the dirt road. Though it was hard to see clearly, I knew I was getting close to the man-made pond. I tucked my hands into my pockets and kept walking without giving much thought to where I was going, my mind drifting to other things: family, friends, the food I planned to eat when I got home. As I was nearing the pond, a gentle breeze passed by, and suddenly I heard the soft crying of a little girl. I turned my head, trying to peer into the darkness, but couldn't see anything more than about 90 centimeters ahead. The crying seemed somewhat distant, so I stopped and turned toward the sound. "Hey, is someone there? What's wrong?" The crying continued and drew closer, and I could hear light footsteps on the ground approaching as well. "Are you lost? Don't cry. Just follow me." The girl's voice hitched in a sob, then continued crying softly. But now she seemed only a few steps behind me. I motioned with my hand and turned to walk on. "Just follow me." The sound of footsteps and her voice continued. "All right. I knew it was dark, but just trust me." I kept walking, the girl still crying behind me but keeping pace, and I was quite grateful I didn't have to slow down to help her along. However, as we neared the pond, the girl's crying grew suddenly louder and began to grate on my nerves. My patience belonging to a 17-year-old had its limits. I had told her multiple times to stop crying, but she wouldn't listen until she was practically sobbing directly in my ear, which made me stop and turn around, even though I still couldn't see anything clearly ahead. "If you don't be quiet, I'll kick you into the pond. Stop crying." And immediately, the crying stopped. Everything fell silent except for the cicadas and the gentle wind through the trees. I paused and looked around, wondering if I had frightened the girl into silence. "Hey, are you still there?" No answer. After calling for her a few more times, I thought she had gone off somewhere. She had been fed up with my shouting and decided to go off on her own. I didn't think much more about it. I turned around and started walking again along the trail toward my uncle's house. When I arrived, they asked why I was home so late, and I told them about the little girl I had tried to bring home, but she had walked off after I snapped at her to stop crying. My uncle's face went white. When I asked what was wrong, I could clearly see him swallowing hard. A great many people had drowned in that pond while walking alone. It was said that at night, the ghost of a young girl who had drowned herself there would drag them into the pond with her before they could pass. I never walked that road alone at night again. Story 12. The Angry Spirit in the Apartment. I'm often told I've been sensitive to the spiritual world from a young age. I'm not entirely sure I believe that myself, at least not that I could see spirits and such things from childhood. But I can't deny that I've always felt the presence of mysterious things around me. I would usually push those feelings aside. I was considered skeptical, but many of the older people insisted I possessed a gift and needed to show greater respect for the spirits belonging to the underworld. Years passed. I moved to various cities and met many people. I think I've changed residences more times in the past 5 years than most people do in their entire lives. Some places were quiet and I could live my life in peace. Others were simply nuisances. I dealt with things as I always did, ignoring the strange sensations I often felt and getting on with my ordinary life. My daily routine was repetitive. Wake up, drink coffee, go to work, have drinks with coworkers, come home for dinner and sleep. I was 28 years old, living in the city, and in the process of changing jobs, looking for work closer to the city center. I didn't want to commute from the suburbs every day, so I chose to find a place in the city close to where I'd be working. I was young, and walking a few city blocks each day wouldn't kill me. There were very few available places in the city, even fewer that met my criteria of being 200% affordable and in a decent neighborhood. After going through the local paper, I found a house for sale at a reasonable price. I went to the real estate office handling the sale, and the agent looked at me with an expression of surprise. I didn't understand what he meant, so I decided, as usual, to be direct and ask what his problem was. "Why are you looking at me like that?" There was a moment of silence before he loosened his tie nervously. "You're not from here, are you?" "I'm from somewhere else. Now tell me why you looked at me so strangely." "Well, there are rumors that the place is haunted, but even the fortune tellers say that whatever is in that house is an extremely angry spirit, stronger than anything they've ever encountered, and practically impossible to drive away." "Oh, come on," I scoffed, looking at him as though he'd lost his mind. I'm sure I mirrored his expression from moments before, well, nearly. I'm sure I looked considerably more irritated. "Are you joking with me?" "No, I'm completely serious. No one has ever." I stayed in that house for more than 3 months, but that meant there was very bad energy there. I wanted to ask why they didn't simply demolish it, but I remembered what my grandmother had told me. If there are wicked, wrathful spirits in a place, the last thing you want to do is disturb their territory. They will pursue every generation of your lineage until the souls of you and your family can no longer find rest. Sighing, I shook my head and took a pen from the cup on his desk. "Give me the paperwork." I was moving there because it was the only place I could afford at that moment. Let the dead come and go as they pleased. I wasted almost no time completing the paperwork and had moved into my new home before the weekend. The first 2 days in the new place, I'd essentially convinced myself that the random sounds in the middle of the night were just the normal settling of the house, the structure contracting and expanding with the outside temperature. However, 2 weeks after moving in, things began to feel slightly strange. I came home late after a work shift, still chatting with a colleague. I was slightly drunk and stumbled into the house, tossed my keys and wallet onto the table. then peeled off my clothes layer by layer before collapsing into bed. I fell asleep quickly. When I opened my eyes, darkness. I heard the sliding door of the wardrobe quietly creak open. I knew without looking that it was my wardrobe. I assumed it had loosened on its own. The place wasn't exactly brand new, so I figured the house was just old, stubborn, and aged. I rolled over in bed to go back to sleep. Less than 5 minutes later, there was relentless tapping on the wall above the headboard, like a demonic woodpecker trying to gnaw through my wall. Drunk and irritated, I immediately sat up and slammed my hand against the wall. "Stop that. I'm trying to sleep." Silence, beautiful silence. I turned back to bed and wasn't disturbed for the rest of the night. About a month in, I had been able to enjoy the quietude of the house. My routine was undisturbed, and aside from the occasional strange noise, creaking and groaning from the floors or walls, I moved about fairly quietly. After a long day of work and a night out with friends, I came home. A female friend of mine came back with me, having lost her keys and it being too late to get them replaced. She begged me to cook for her, and afterward, I let her sleep in the guest room. She fell asleep quickly. After washing up the dishes, I returned to my room and prepared for a good night's sleep. I'm not sure whether I had been asleep for 10 minutes or an hour, but the temperature in my room changed instantly as though the warmth was being steadily drained from it. The abrupt shift made me uncomfortable, and I stirred in my sleep. The air began to grow thin and cold, and at that point I woke up, but kept my eyes shut. The farthest corner of the bedroom was the source of the cold, seeping through the walls and flooding the room as though the air pressure were slowly shifting, growing colder with every passing moment. The sensation intensified until I could feel my limbs trembling faintly beneath the blanket, and that was when I felt it. You know the feeling when you know you're being watched. That sensation of someone hovering at the edge of your bed, looking down at you. You don't need to open your eyes to know someone is there. You can feel their presence. That is exactly what I felt, only inches from my face. If I opened my eyes, I would certainly be staring into the cold, sharp eyes of something from another world. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath. Instead, I clenched my hands into fists, pressing my nails into my palms. The pain kept my mind sharp and kept the terror threatening to consume me from the inside at bay. The room was absolutely silent except for my own breathing, but I could still feel a face drawing closer with each passing second. The room grew colder still, and a few seconds later, I heard the sound of a tissue being drawn from the box of tissues I kept beside the bed. 1, 2, 3. I sat bolt upright, threw the blanket aside, and screamed at the top of my lungs before grabbing the tissue box and hurling it across the bedroom, screaming again. I scrambled out of bed and frantically switched on the light, my chest heaving with each labored breath. I don't know what you are, but you had better get out of here and never come back. Do you understand me, you stupid thing? Nothing but silence. My friend, who had been staying with me that night, walked into the room. I had screamed and ripped her from a deep sleep. When she asked what was wrong, I told her it was nothing and told her to go back to bed. Once she was convinced I was really all right, she returned to her room. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face to release the tension and anxiety that had come over me, then returned to my room to finally try to sleep. The cold had left my room. Just as I was about to get back into bed, I was suddenly very cold. From the corner of my eye, I glanced down at the floor, beside the bedside table, and there, scattered across the floor, were 3 crumpled tissues.